Pluribus Episode 7 has just been released on Apple TV, and we get an episode of two halves with both Carol and Manousos. Manousos is making the long trip to meet Carol after watching her recording last week, and he finds it incredibly hard to cross the Darrien Gap on his way to Albuquerque. Meanwhile, Carol enjoys some time alone, playing golf around the empty city and setting off fireworks in her own backyard. But by the end, we find out that she might have reached her breaking point. So in this spoiler review and explained analysis, I'm going to be giving you my breakdown of Pluribus Episode 7 entitled The Gap, alongside discussing my general thoughts towards it. Before I get into it though, if you want to see much more on Season 1 of Pluribus, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating and subscribing to the channel. But without further ado, let's dive into my review and breakdown of Pluribus Episode 7. So Episode 7 of Pluribus, titled The Gap, feels like the first chapter of the series where the emotional stakes and the physical journey of its characters finally begin to align. Manousos, the resilient Paraguayan survivor, introduced as a solitary, sets out on a perilous overland trek to reach Carol after receiving her tapes and finally understanding that she isn't alone. His decision to leave the safety of his bunker and face the grueling trip across the notoriously unforgiving Darrien Gap, which is between South and Central America, mirrors the greater interior shift in his character towards a purposeful seeker. His physical journey underscores the painful, disorienting effort required to connect in a world that no longer makes simple human contact intuitive. Meanwhile, Carol's return from Las Vegas finds her confronting not just the hive mind's encroaching ideology, but her own limits. Her sense of rebellion now faces loneliness and defiance in ways that feel both visceral and poignant. I think the way the episode showcases the urgency of Manousos' journey only amplifies Carol's introspective struggle, and in seeing their parallel paths, one moving steadily towards human contact and the other wrestling with what humanity even means now, gives the narrative a fresh kind of momentum. The episode opens with Carol clearly struggling with a bit of denial, and that's because her recent meeting with Kumba in Las Vegas turned out to be a mixed bag. On the upside, she learns that the Joined can't take an uninfected person's stem cells to cure them and pull them into the collective. They need that person's explicit consent first, and Carol definitely isn't about to give it. It's also key to note that with the show's earlier mention of Carol's frozen eggs, which might give the Joined a loophole, something they could use without needing her consent. But at the same time, that feels like it would break the whole philosophy that the Joined claim to follow. So whether they'd actually go down that route is still up in the air. But last week, Carol also got hit with another reveal. Kumba said that the other uninfected have been holding their own meetings without her, and that they've pretty much decided that they don't want her involved at all. So in this episode, when we catch up with Carol on her drive back to Albuquerque, she's belting out the song "It's the End of the World as We Know It" and "I Feel Fine." It's something that leans hard into the irony of all of it. And beyond the fact that she's now completely isolated, there's still the massive problem of how to cure the Joined, something she currently has absolutely no plan for. So Carol throws herself into full-on distraction mode. She stops at a gas station, picks up some fireworks, and asks the Hive to bring her an ice-cold Gatorade. The following moments back in Albuquerque include golf, beers, soaking in hot springs, and a fancy dress-up dinner set to a dramatic player piano rendition of "I Will Survive." And of course, through a lot of these moments, Carol is singing. But underneath all this celebrating, something is clearly off. Within this time, she even steals an original Georgia O'Keeffe painting to hang it in her house. For a moment, those things actually make her smile. But when the episode eventually brings us back to her about a month later, it's obvious that all that activeness couldn't cover up the truth. And that is that Carol has grown deeply and painfully lonely. We come to the other half of the episode, and this brings us back to Manousos, who set off on a journey last week towards Carol. Manousos' increasingly intense journey really shows just how differently he and Carol have reacted to the Joined. It's interesting because yes, we see them on the same side, but you can see the difference in their approaches here. At first, Manousos' refusal to interact with the joins can seem extreme, especially compared to Carol's more casual, almost flippant attitude. But when you take a step back, it's hard not to see his point. After all, the whole world has been supposedly overtaken by an alien force, including everyone he's ever cared about. The issue with Manousos is that unlike Carol, who's willing to take international flights or drink slightly warm Gatorade when she asked for it ice cold, he refuses to accept anything from them. That stubbornness forces him to travel all the way from Paraguay on his own, eventually attempting a grueling trek through the Darrien Gap. The mentioned Darrien Gap in this episode is a wild isolated stretch of jungle that separates Panama from Colombia. With no roads and a reputation for extreme danger, it forms the only land link between Central and South America. Despite its risks of thick rainforest, swampy terrain, and threatening wildlife, it has become a major, often deadly passageway for migrants heading towards North America. It's a terrible journey, but I guess you gotta give Manousos credit for making this longer trip and taking action on what he believes is the right choice individually. Now, he's warned by a slightly more serious group of joins that he's heading into extreme heat and humidity, dirty water, venomous snakes, and plants teeming with dangerous bacteria. But he decides to keep doing it his own way, trekking through the jungle alone on foot. And before he does so, he also sets fire to his beloved car rather than let the joins take it away. That's just how against them he really is. He says to them before heading into the jungle, "Nothing on this planet is yours." He says this just after they try to dissuade him from the dangerous hike and even offer him a ride straight to Carol. He replies, "You can't give me anything because everything you have is stolen. You don't belong here." He then continues off into the jungle. During his journey, we learn quite quickly that he has taught himself basic English from the cassette course he listened to while driving. This is from that same yellow book he took with him when he set off last week. While Manousos hacks his way through the jungle with a machete, he says to himself over and over in English, "My name is Manousos Oviedo, I am not one of them, I wish to save the world." He copes with the early part of the journey quite well, but as expected, things eventually become too much for him. After slipping on a rock, he's impaled by a tree covered in Cenobite-like spines teeming with deadly bacteria. Desperate, he tries to cauterize the wounds with his red-hot machete, but his still bleeding wounds overwhelm him. He eventually collapses and passes out, and the last thing he sees is a joint medic descending from a helicopter to get him. Knowing Manousos, he'd almost certainly prefer to die on his own terms, but it looks like fate isn't going to give him that choice. I can't see Manousos being thrilled about being rescued by the joint, even if they did save his life. And the big question now is, where will they take him? Well, one of the others did offer to fly him straight to New Mexico to meet Carol, so my guess is that he's been taken to a hospital in Albuquerque. If that is the case, we could finally see Carol and Manousos cross paths in episode 8, or more likely in the season finale. This brings us back to Carol for the ending of episode 7. We learn that after 34 days completely alone, Carol finally hits her breaking point. She sets off a full array of fireworks just for fun, blasting Stars and Stripes Forever at high volume. When one of the rockets tips over with its barrel aimed right at her, she calmly turns to face it, seemingly ready to take the hit and die this way. The rocket narrowly misses, streaking past and setting her garage on fire, and she promptly puts this out with her garden hose. The next day though is where we see what is truly affecting Carol as she paints "Come Back" in huge white letters outside her house on the road. Eventually, Zosia pulls up outside and Carol collapses in her arms crying. So it looks like Manousos might have to be the one to snap her back into a state of resistance. And these final moments of the episode leave us with a lot of questions. Does this mark the end of the others' self-imposed distance from Carol? Is she finally ready to live and work alongside them? Has Zosia truly forgiven her for nearly killing her back in episode 4? And what happens when Carol and Manousos finally cross paths? Taken together, the ending positions both Carol and Manousos on the edge of a major change. Manousos may have no choice but to accept help from the Hive, and Carol may be surrendering to her need for connection, even if it means softening her resistance. The episode closes not with answers, but with emotional vulnerability, setting up the question of whether these two fiercely independent people will be transformed or undone by the very community they have tried to keep at arm's length. For me personally, I think it will be Carol meeting Manousos that brings her back to the path of resistance. Yes, I think Carol has become increasingly lonely, but that shouldn't mean she should change her perspective entirely. And with Manousos, well, he looks like the kind of person to stay firm in his feelings, and he'll probably feel disgusted that they took him to Albuquerque instead of letting him die. It'll be interesting to see how Carol and Manousos' meeting does go down, and I do think that this will be the catalyst to make them remember what they are individually fighting for and what they are against. So what are my overall thoughts on the new episode? Well, Pluribus episode 7 is one of the season's most emotionally resonant hours, using parallel narratives to explore the psychological cost of isolation in a world built on total connection. The episode's greatest strength is the contrast it draws between Manousos and Carol, two people who have refused assimilation into the hive-minded collective, but whose resistance manifests in sharply different ways. Carol's half of the episode gives us something quieter, but becomes quite devastating. Her return to Albuquerque initially plays like a fantasy of individuality, but the novelty erodes quickly. The show captures the slow suffocation of loneliness with impressive subtlety, letting her emotional unravelling creep in at the edges before collapsing into the heart-wrenching moment when she asks the others to come back. It's a beautifully written descent that never mocks her independence, but instead highlights how human connection, even in imperfect forms, is something none of us can entirely outrun. Meanwhile, with Manousos having finally learnt that Carol is out there through the tape she sent him, he embarks on a perilous journey to reach her. His trek took on the feel of a classic cinematic odyssey, a near silent, grueling road trip through dangerous terrain where he insists on self-reliance and repeatedly rejects offered help from the others. He's determined to meet Carol on his own terms. At one point, his resolve and physical limits are tested in brutal fashion, and he faces the bitter irony of help from the very collective he has spent the episode avoiding. Carlos Manuel Vesca delivers a strong performance that perfectly captures a man who'd rather risk it all against a chunga palm than accept any help from the joint. Manousos' character has been built up slowly, both through the writing and Vesca's commitment to letting us glimpse his mindset. The small details are very telling, like the moment he pauses to lay his hand on his car's hood, saying goodbye to a loyal part of his history before venturing into the Darrien Gap. It's surprising because I didn't think he'd be such a stark contrast to Carol, and that makes the eventual meeting between them, possibly not until the season finale in 2 weeks, all the more intriguing. Stylistically, episode 7 also stands out for its stark visuals and emphasis on atmosphere over using too much dialogue. The narrative continues to challenge traditional genre conventions by spending long stretches without conversation, focusing instead on the psychological weight of isolation and the lengths people will go to preserve their individuality. Rhea Seehorn's performance as Carol remains a highlight too, carrying much of the emotional bulk as her character teeters between defiant independence and raw loneliness. In fact, Manousos' journey infused the episode with a sense of physical danger and grim perseverance that balances Carol's internal struggle. While not every comedic or narrative beat lands perfectly in this episode, the gap still deepens the series' thematic exploration of autonomy, identity, and what it means to resist assimilation in a world dominated by a collective consciousness. But that was my spoiler review and explained analysis for Pluribus episode 7. I will be doing a video on my theories and predictions for episode 8, so keep a lookout for that upload and stay tuned to my channel for more breakdowns on the show. But to those who have already seen episode 7, what are your thoughts on all the events that went down, and what are your current theories on where this is all going? Let me know down below in the comment section. For much more videos on Vince Gilligan's Pluribus, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like rating and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.